All right. Hello, greetings everybody. Robert French here, also known in the PlayStation universe or network as Red French 5. Many of you out there may have even killed me as Red French 5 on Fortnite. But today I'm going to do a little bit of Spider-Man on PlayStation 4 for a few reasons. One, because I just love this title on PlayStation here. The Spider-Man video game titles have always been favorites of mine, going back to the original Game Boy and Sega Genesis. They've just always been go-tos and favorites. Secondly, Spider-Man's just always been a favorite of mine, a favorite Marvel character. In fact, I feel like Spider-Man's kind of like the Mickey Mouse to the Marvel universe. I'm gonna go ahead and switch my costume up here to a little something better. There we go. Looking good, looking good. But thirdly, I'm doing this because I just need practice playing video games and talking at the same time. I come from a generation where that wasn't a thing. I mentioned a second ago the original Game Boy and Sega Genesis. Talking really wasn't a thing when I was growing up and playing video games. In fact, you could get punched in the arm or in the leg or something for talking while your friend was trying to do something in a video game. There was a little bit of trash talking, I feel like, in like Mortal Kombat and stuff like that. But for the most part, it was like, all right, you take the top half of the screen, I'll take the bottom half of the screen, and that's all we would say to each other. But now talking is a big thing. You put your headset on and you talk to your buddies. A lot of times my friends will be like, dude, are you still there? And I'm like, yeah, I'm here. I'm concentrating, man. I can't play and talk at the same time. Let's see how I do here. Speaking of...
You guys are like little kingpins in training. So cute. Watch it.
I'm surprised even that little bit of talking that I'm doing at the beginning there didn't mess me up more. Hey.
Gotta catch up. I think your shocks need some work.
How will Spider-Man doing the talking from here on out?
Curbside service.
Come on, come on, come on, come on. Beautiful.
Huh.
Don't run away, guys.
Keep these wannabe pushers in check.
Man.
Wait a minute, what's that feeling? Do I miss him? No.
All right. That was actually not too bad. Typically,
Good news.
when
The
I'm
police are coming to
talking,
protect you.
and here we go.
Good to have you in our corner, man.
Little city brotherly love there. All right, that's what I'm talking about. Yeah, so like I said, I come from a generation where I don't talk playing video games. I'm surprised that little bit of talking I did there did not mess me up a whole lot. But like I said, I figured why not get some practice in talking while playing video games. So I'm going to talk about Spider-Man while playing Spider-Man. Going back to the PlayStation, or excuse me, the Sega Genesis title, the Game Boy title, that's kind of how I got introduced into the Spider-Man character in general. Just a quick glimpse into...
Officers near Gramercy, please report.
Alright, let's go check these guys out. Just a quick history into my combo collecting. I didn't start off collecting
Hey, an old-fashioned
superhero
DVD.
titles.
Gotta love the classics.
In fact, when I first started collecting
Ever hear of
comics,
knocking? You asked for it. Say goodnight.
let's hold that thought for a second there. Me neither, pal.
Look at it this way. If I'd actually let you break in, you'd be going away for a lot longer.
So I didn't really get into Spider-Man, like I said, through the comics. Initially, it was through titles like the Sega Genesis title, the Game Boy title. And my comic book collecting started more with horror comics, Tales from the Crypt, Tales of Horror, or Tales from the Vault, like sci-fi mystery stuff like that. And in fact, like these old reprints of these comics, most often told stories where if somebody got bit by something radioactive or got hit with cosmic waves from outer space, they didn't become superheroes. They became like mutants and monsters and would terrorize the city. And that's kind of what I was into. I was into monsters and the mayhem and the villains, and not so much the superheroes at first. And then through characters like the Punisher and Ghost Rider and Wolverine, I found characters like Spider-Man. Wolverine was essential, actually. More than others, I feel like, getting me into that whole world of characters who wore spandex and who where are these guys that are down here? But he got me into those characters, like I said, who wore spandex and had superpowers, like the X-Men and Spider-Man, of course. More so than others. But the Punisher... Just gonna take care of that real quick. But yeah, the Punisher, Ghost Rider, these guys were like a little more brutal, a little more gruesome. They were a little bit closer to some of the horror comics I was used to reading. Wolverine as well, a little more graphic. But that led the gateway to like I said, characters like Spider-Man. And when I got into Spider-Man, it was a good time. Todd McFarlane was doing his run on his own title, Spider-Man. In the Amazing Spider-Man title, the Carnage character was becoming a thing, and you know, him and Venom were teaming up to take on the Carnage, and his parents were being reintroduced into the book. So it was a fun title to get into as a young teenager getting into comic books. And something that I noted right away.
Officers in Murray Hill, stand by for further instruction.
How about if I take over, guys? Something that I noticed right away in Spider-Man comic books was that, you know, he was a guy that just
drug trade's gotten more aggressive
as well as dealing with you know, superhero problems. He was also dealing with real life problems as well. And to me, that was
knocking the ever-loving stuffing out of dealers is my anti-drug.
You know, something I noticed, like I said, right away, just being a young reader, like, you know, he was dealing with rent, dealing with problems with his girlfriend, Mary Jane, dealing with issues with Aunt May, as well as trying to save the world and stop Doc Ock. And so, even though he was like this 30-year-old guy, he was a very relatable character to me. And I think that was fascinating that, you know, something that the character set out to be decades earlier was still holding true to the character when I was reading it. You know, he was always meant to be just this character who had everyday problems. And in fact, the more I got into the character and got into earlier issues, like, you know, I have the reprints of his first, like, 12 titles when he was a teenager. You know, it made me love him even more because also at that time, most superheroes were adults and started off as adults, where Spider-Man started off as this kid And it really was the idea of fantasy that, you know, some kid can be a superhero. I think it's been said in
Comes to the face is
most,
not consumer etiquette.
I think it's been said in most interviews, or a lot of interviews, that when it comes to teenagers in comics, they're most often like sidekicks. You know, Batman has his Robin, and you know, Green Arrow has his sidekick. And typically, teenagers in comics or sidekicks are the like Jimmy Olsen, where they're always getting in trouble, and you know, Spider-Man has to save them. Where here we have this character who's a teenager who's going out and saving the day. And then, like I said, I was also reading it at the time when Todd McFarlane was doing this book, and that was just a really cool, fun time. A fan of the more, like I said, the horror comics and the darker stuff. Todd McFarlane also was like ringing true to my heart, because it was dealing with a lot of stuff that most comics wouldn't really touch on at that point.
All units 1034. Repeat, assault reported. Reported location is
And
near
what I
the
mean is
theater
like
district.
child abduction, murders, mutilation. And that was stuff that, you know, a lot of comics might try to stay away from, especially when it comes to kids. But that's what I was looking for when I first got into this character.
Try hitting me. Spoiler, I hit back.
Let's go ahead and wrap that up
Down, die by the beat down.
real quick.
I think I'll be okay.
But there was, before I even really got into comics, there was one comic that I had of Spider-Man's that even I think predates my horror comic collection. Was when I think it was High C did this promotion where they did a 6-part, or it was like a 5-part mini comic book. I don't know if any of you are familiar with this out there, but there was a High C, this is back in, gosh, like I said, the late 80s probably, where they did a 6-part mini comic where Spider-Man took on the Sinister Six. And I had like parts 4 or 5 or something like that. It was towards the end of this run in this comic, and he was dealing with all 6 of these characters. And
All units on alert.
I just remember thinking, like,
Location is
who
in the vicinity of Devil's
is
Shot.
this character? You know, like, I knew enough to know that, like, you know, even the Justice League
I'll tune my earpiece to listen for sounds of someone
was needed to take on, you know, 6 or 7 villains. Like, you know, there was the Legion of Doom, and you needed the Justice of League to take down all of these characters. And here you had Spider-Man, who was just this one guy who was
Easy. I
doing
got
the same thing. And I remember being like really young and being familiar with the Super Friends
there.
and thinking
Those
like,
are the
man,
guys
I
that did
think, you know, Spider-Man could take on, Spider-Man could take on the Super Friends by himself, you know. Spider-Man is no joke. Let's go ahead and lead these guys. See, I hate these big guys. These are my least.
Let's kick it up a notch. A thing of beauty.
Well, I guess I'm supposed to be talking while I'm playing the video game, but he does such a great job himself.
So great for you.
Yeah, but anyway, I just remember anyway. What was I saying? The Justice League. Yeah, Spider-Man could take on the Justice League. I remember thinking that, like 8, 9 years old. Then by the time I was like 12 years old, I was a huge fan. Fox had a great animated series, Saturday mornings, that I followed, and that touched on a lot of the stories and the history of the character that I hadn't read as a collector, but made me want to go back and read those stories and get more familiar with some of these other characters. Morbius and the whole the Man-Spider saga.
Those lunatics would kill someone driving like that. Please tell me your horn plays Dixie.
I hadn't heard that one yet.
Carjacker delivery. Gotta shut the.
And then, of course, I think that was another thing about Spider-Man that pulled me in as a kid, were the wisecracks.
Guys, if you worked this hard at a legit job, you wouldn't need to be criminals.
Oh, that was. See, this is what I'm talking. See, the talking. Oh. Reform, regroup. You see, the talking and the playing is not my forte here.
Kick it up a notch. Never touch a scrap.
Right. Nice. Oh my gosh.
Gotta give that wheelman props.
Oh my god. Yeah, I hate those big guys more than anything else in this game. They've killed me more times than main bosses or anything else in this game here. They're cheaters. Those big guys are freaking cheaters. Yeah, Spider-Man's always got these funny little quips, these funny little one-liners. You know, most superheroes are pretty serious in the face of danger. Not Spider-Man. He's always got something funny to say. And you know, something else that always really drew me in with Spider-Man was that before he got his powers, you know, he was just this guy. He was just this kid in high school. You know, I mentioned the Punisher and like Wolverine before. You know, these guys were like soldiers and had like a little bit of training before they even got their powers. Oh, why didn't that work? Come on. Oh, it's not charged up yet? Oh, no, 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 it's not charged up.
Someone's trapped in that car.
But yeah, Spider-Man was just this punk kid in high school, kind of like figured out as he went along, you know. Even Iron Man and Bruce Wayne were kind of like these billionaires before they became superheroes. And,
Okay, still need to rescue the trapped civilians.
I'm gonna tell everybody.
Spider-Man was just trying to figure this out as he went along, you know. making his costume up as he went along, making up these gadgets as he went along. And he didn't have any experience before, you know, he was bitten by the
Everyone's
spider.
safe.
He was just
Let
this
fire and
guy.
rescue do their jobs.
You saved my life.
See if I can get some Spidey love. Any Spidey love? You want a selfie? Where's my Spidey love? Come on, somebody's got to give me some Spidey love.
Never see Jameson. I'm giving him an earful.
There we go.
It's really you. One time, up high.
You know, something else that's been said too, and I think this is also very true as a kid with me, is that, you know, it could be anybody under that mask.
1034. Repeat,
Um,
assault reported.
You know, he could be black, he could be white, Chinese, Indian. It didn't really matter. You know, anybody could be Spider-Man under that mask. And it's amazing that these are all ideas and these are all things that are still true
Try and
today.
guess how I feel about bullets.
Decades and decades later after this character was created. You guys are just a little bit too dangerous. Oh, there's two of these big guys. I guess we die right here to these guys.
Oh what? It's not
Huh.
fun getting beat up?
Oh, that's
We'll sit
cool.
with that for a while.
The little zappers.
They were like animals.
Little zappers take care of them right away. That's pretty awesome. And you know, I think a lot of these things that I talked about with Spider-Man is why he's continued to be like a favorite today, and why it's just as fun
Officers, be
to
advised.
imagine,
Slugging was just reported. Any
you know,
officers
swinging
near
through the
Firehouse,
city
please copy.
at the age of almost 40,
That's a
pretending to be Spider-Man as it was when I was like
Oh, you started without me.
12. And it's just that the same ideas and the same things that he stood for back then still remain true to this day. And, you know, I would love to see the movies do something with Spider-Man where he's a bit more mature, perhaps. You know, something like where he's in his 30s. You know, I've always enjoyed the movies that they've done as of date, as of, you know, this current date. But I'd like to see Spider-Man get out of the high school, college
That's it? I feel like the hold-up
age
guys are
and
phoning
see
it in
him
lately.
kind of how I grew up with him in his 30s, working at the university, either as like a teacher or some kind of an assistant, and dealing with problems where it's like, you know, trying to get an apartment with Mary Jane, or they're, you know, they're moving in together, or getting married, or talking about marriage, or kids, and just these different things that, even when I was a kid and I couldn't really relate to, like, you know, buying an apartment or, you know, getting married, I remember loving these stories because these were just like real life problems and real life issues. And also as a kid looking at Peter Parker as, like, you know, the cool older teacher, and like wanting to go to him with my problems and stuff like that. You know, when you can't talk to your parents and you can't talk to, you know, the principal or whatever, you can always go to Parker, to teacher Parker, and the science teacher, and let him know what's going on, and he's always going to be there to kind of help you. And I would love to see the movies kind of do something like that, where you have Spider-Man who's been around for a little bit, and
I should have recorded this.
don't know where I am. I'm recording the Spider-Man.
Knocking the ever-loving stuffing out of dealers is my anti-drug.
All right, well,
Coming, so I'm going.
there you go. I think Spider-Man just said it. Thanks for tuning in, but I think we're going to go. Thanks for just kind of listening to me babble about Spider-Man for a little bit. One of my favorites. Like I said, kind of how I got into the character. And you know, what makes me love the character, and why I continue to love the character. You know, I still continue to read Spider-Man comics, you know, to this day. I think it's why his movies are always a good success in the box office. And I think that's why he'll always continue to be popular. He's just, like I say, he's a very relatable character. I think anybody can pick up a Spider-Man and picture themselves underneath that mask, and even once the mask comes off and you look at who Peter Parker is, you find yourself relating to him as well, because either you're going through the same problems, or you can see him as a friend going through those problems. You know, maybe you've had a friend going through those same problems, or a relative going through the same problems. So I think that's you know, why Spider-Man is so popular, that organicness of his character. But anyway, thanks for listening to me ramble and get some practice in talking while playing video games. Not something I'm used to. I actually did pretty good there while talking. Typically I can't remember what does what and run my mouth at the same time. But until next time, thanks again. Don't forget to follow me on Twitter at RFA the Third. That's RFA the Third, 3RD, at Twitter. And you know, for more clips and vids and stuff like that from my gameplay. And enough said. Later, guys.